But Frank Sinatra's fist was moving, fast, aimed at Dean Martin's face. 10 people were watching. Nobody moved. Nobody could move fast enough. The fist was 6 inches away, then 5, then 4. There was no time, no way to stop it. Frank was committed. The punch was coming. The crew in that room had worked on a dozen productions. They had seen arguments on set. They had seen ego collide with ego and tempers break and things get said that required apologies the next morning. None of them had seen this. None of them had stood in a room and watched a fist in motion and understood that they were about to witness something that could not be undone. Something that would end one of the most famous friendships in the world. But it did not end. Because of what happened next, because of what Dean Martin did, and because of 4 words spoken quietly in a room full of people who were holding their breath, then something happened, something nobody expected. Dean Martin did something. 2 seconds. That was all it took. What Dean did not just stop the punch. It saved a friendship. This is 1964. A movie set in Hollywood. And the moment that defined what real strength actually looks like. Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin had known each other for 15 years by 1964. That is not a small number. 15 years of shared stages and shared meals and shared everything. The Rat Pack was the public face of it. But underneath the tuxedos and the Copa room and the Las Vegas nights was something simpler. 2 men who had chosen each other, who had built something that outsiders called a partnership and insiders knew was something closer to brotherhood. Frank was the engine, the force, the man whose will shaped every room he entered. When Frank wanted something done, it got done. When Frank was happy, the party was electric. When Frank was not happy, the temperature dropped fast. People who loved him understood this. They adjusted. They gave him space. They waited for the storm to pass. People who did not love him encountered a different experience entirely. Frank's temper was documented, discussed, feared in some corners of the industry. He had ended relationships over smaller provocations than the one building on that movie set. He had walked off stages. He had dismissed crew members mid-production. He had the kind of anger that did not calculate consequences before it acted. It arrived and it moved and it left damage in its wake, and the accounting came later. But with Dean it had always been different. Dean was the one person in Frank's world who did not calibrate himself around Frank's moods. He did not tense when Frank tensed. He did not accelerate when Frank accelerated. He was not indifferent to Frank's state. He was simply not controlled by it. And that independence, that steady refusal to be shaped by the weather Frank was generating, was one of the things Frank valued most about him. Even when it drove him insane. Dean was different. Dean was the still point. The man who could sit in the center of Frank's hurricane and feel no wind. His calm was not performance. It was not strategy. It was simply who he was. Dino Crossetti from Steubenville had learned early that panic served nobody, that the loudest voice in the room was rarely the most important one. That cool was not an attitude. It was a discipline. On a movie set, those 2 natures usually complemented each other. Frank's intensity pushed the work forward. Dean's ease kept the atmosphere livable. Directors loved having them together. The chemistry was real. The results showed on screen. But that day in 1964 was not a usual day. Frank had arrived on set already carrying something. Not a mood exactly. Something heavier than a mood. The crew noticed it in the parking lot. The way he walked. The way he answered questions in 3 words when he would normally answer in 30. Something was pressing on him from the inside. Something personal. something professional. Something that had nothing to do with the movie, and everything to do with the way Frank's world worked. There were things happening in Frank's life that year that did not make the press in the way they should have. Pressures that stayed private, complications that a man at the center of an empire accumulates without warning. He had people depending on him, projects committed to, relationships that required management. The weight of it did not always stay internal. Sometimes it leaked. And on the days it leaked the most, everyone around Frank felt it. The day's schedule was tight, long scenes, multiple setups. The kind of day where everything takes longer than it should and tempers grow short by the afternoon. Frank's jaw was tight by 10 in the morning. By noon his hands were in fists at his sides between takes. The director knew to keep things moving. The crew knew to speak only when spoken to. Dean knew to wait. But there was something else happening. Something beneath the surface of the tension. A question that nobody in that building was asking out loud, but everybody was feeling. What was Frank carrying? And how long before it came out? The answer to the first question was complicated. The answer to the second was, sooner than anyone hoped, Frank Sinatra's fist was moving toward Dean Martin's face. The crew watched in horror. There was no time to stop it. But Dean did something. Something that nobody in that room expected. Something that would save a friendship 15 years in the making. We are building a channel about these moments, when awareness mattered. When calm defeated rage. When one action changed everything. We are at 400 subscribers trying to reach 700. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe now. What happened in the next 2 seconds would stun everyone watching. The argument started over something small. They always do. A line reading. One line in one scene. Frank wanted it a particular way. The director had a note. Dean offered something in between. It was the kind of conversation that happens 50 times a day on a working film set. The kind that lasts 3 minutes and then everyone moves on. But Frank did not move on. His voice was louder than it needed to be. Not shouting yet, but edged, the way a voice gets when the real issue is not the one being spoken about. He gestured sharper than the conversation required. His words had weight behind them that the line reading itself did not deserve. Dean responded the way Dean always responded, easy, warm. No escalation. He acknowledged Frank's point, offered his own, kept the temperature even. His voice never changed. His body language stayed open. He was not dismissing Frank. He was not conceding to him either. He was just being reasonable. And that was the problem. The calm was gasoline on Frank's fire. There is a particular kind of anger that needs resistance to feel justified. That feeds on an equal and opposite reaction. When Frank raged and others raged back, there was a logic to it, a transaction. But when Frank raged and Dean stayed steady, there was nowhere for the anger to go. It had to generate its own fuel. And it did. Frank's face went red. His breathing changed. The crew started backing away in small increments. Not running, just creating distance. The way people do when the air in a room begins to feel different. The way animals respond to pressure before humans consciously register what they are responding to. 2 of the crew members exchanged a look. The kind that does not need words. The kind that says, we have been on enough sets to know when something is about to go wrong. This was going wrong. The director said something. Frank did not hear it or did not care. His eyes were locked on Dean, on the ease of Dean, on the way Dean was standing there being calm when Frank needed someone to be as unsettled as he was. Dean's voice never changed. Still easy, still warm. Frank's hands were fists. He said something sharp, something that went past the line reading and into territory that was personal. The crew went still. When Frank crossed that line, things got serious. When he made it about the man instead of the work, something shifted. Dean looked at Frank, not with anger, not with hurt, with something quieter than both, recognition. He had seen Frank like this before. He had seen what was underneath it. He knew that the words coming out of Frank's mouth were not the real words. They were the overflow from something deeper that had no language yet. That was the thing about knowing someone for 15 years. You learned the difference between what they were saying and what they meant. Frank was saying things about professionalism and commitment and who was taking the work seriously. What he meant was, I am falling apart and I need someone to hold the room together because I cannot do it right now. Dean understood that. He had understood it the moment Frank had walked onto set that morning carrying the weight. He had been waiting, watching, giving Frank space to find his way through or not find it. That was what you did for someone you loved. You did not rush in. You did not make their struggle into your moment. You stayed close and you waited. But the waiting was over now. Dean said something back, direct, still calm. Frank's jaw tightened. His arm moved. What nobody knew in that moment was how close everything was to breaking. Not just the argument, not just the day, something older. Something that had held for 15 years through every storm and tour and crisis. The thing that held was about to be tested in a way it had never been tested before. But that was not the whole story, because something else was happening in Dean Martin in those seconds. Something internal and invisible. Something that would determine everything that followed. Frank's arm moved. And then his fist was moving. Fast, 6 inches from Dean's face. Dean Martin caught Frank Sinatra's fist. Mid-air 6 inches from his face. Held it there. Looked Frank in the eyes. Said 4 words. The room was silent. Frank was seeing what he had almost done. What he had almost destroyed. What happened in the next 60 seconds would determine whether their friendship survived. The moment is here. Dean's hand shot up, not to book catch. His fingers closed around Frank's fist, mid-air. The grip was freesive, not punishing. Just there, holding, stopping, containing. The room stopped. Everything stopped. 10 people held their breath. The director, the camera operator, the script supervisor, the lighting crew, the production assistant who had been 20 feet away and had crossed the distance without knowing why, all of them, still, silent, looking at the same thing, Frank's fist, in Dean's hand, 6 inches from Dean's face. Think about what that image was, a fist in motion, a hand that came from nowhere and closed around it. 2 men frozen in the configuration of what almost happened. The distance between a catastrophe and nothing at all measured in 6 inches and 1 reflex. Frank's eyes went wide. He was looking at his own fist, at Dean's fingers wrapped around it, at the space between the knuckles and the face they had been aimed at. 6 inches. That was the measurement of what had almost happened. 6 inches between the moment they were in and a different moment entirely. One where something broke that could not be unbroken. One where 15 years became a story about how it ended. The crew was not breathing. Nobody in that room was breathing. Dean did not move. He stood exactly where he had been standing, one hand extended, Frank's fist in it. His face was steady, not angry, not scared, not triumphant, not performing anything, just present, watching Frank, waiting. There was something in Dean's face in that moment that the witnesses would struggle to describe later, not because it was complicated, Because it was simple in a way that most faces never achieve. It was the face of someone who was completely certain of where he was and what he was doing. No doubt. No hesitation. No need for the moment to be anything other than what it was. Frank's eyes moved from his fist to Dean's face. Dean spoke. 4 words. Quite a shout. Not a whisper. The voice of a man who was certain. Not like this, Frank. That was all. 4 words. Frank's face changed. The rage was there 1 second. Then it began to move, not disappear, transform. The red in his face shifted. His jaw unclenched. His eyes changed in a way that the crew could see from 15 feet away but could not quite name. Rage became shock. Shock became something else. Something that came up from somewhere under the anger. Realization. He was looking at what he had almost done. The fist, still in Dean's grip, the face it had been aimed at, the man holding it, the friend, the 15 years. All of it arriving in the same instant. The way things arrive when the adrenaline stops and the understanding starts. And here is what the witnesses would remember longest. Not the swing, not the catch. The moment after. When Frank Sinatra, who had dominated every room he had ever entered, stood with his fist in his best friend's hand and understood what he had almost become. Frank's hand started shaking, still in Dean's grip, a fine trembling that moved up through his wrist and into his arm. His eyes filled, not with rage anymore, with something worse, the specific grief of a person who has seen their worst self from the outside, who has watched themselves about to do something they cannot take back and understood in the watching what it would have cost. He had swung at Dean Martin, at Dean, at the one person in his life who had never asked anything from him, who had never used him, who had never needed the version of Frank that performed, the one who just wanted the actual person, the one who showed up and stayed. He had swung at that. Dean let go of the fist, slow, careful, the way you release something fragile. He did not drop it. He did not push it away. He opened his hand and let Frank's fist sink of its own weight. He did not step back. He stood exactly where he was, closant, not leaving, not retreating, just there, waiting, giving Frank the space to arrive at whatever was next without rushing him toward it. Frank tried to speak. The words did not come. His mouth opened, something started and stopped. He tried again. I am sorry. The words came out broken, not the polished apology of a man in control of himself. The raw version, the kind that does not have a performance in it, the kind that comes from somewhere real and sounds like it. Dean put his hand on Frank's shoulder. I know. That was all he said. 2 words to answer 4, and in the calculus of that moment, 2 words were the right number. Not more, not less. Not a speech about what almost happened. Not a lesson about anger and friendship and what they meant to each other. Just I know. Which meant I was here. I saw it. I am still here. That has not changed. The crew had stopped existing for both of them. The set had stopped existing. The movie had stopped existing. There were 2 men in a space that had contracted to just the distance between them. And in that contracted space, something was happening that had nothing to do with any of the things that had caused the argument. Someone in the crew made a quiet decision. They began to move, not toward the men, away, creating space, filing out through the nearest doors and toward the farthest corners. Within 2 minutes, the area was empty. Just Frank and Dean. Backstage, alone. Frank sat down on an equipment crate. His hands were in his lap. He was looking at them. The hands that had swung. The hands that were still trembling slightly at the edges. He was a man who had filled Madison Square Garden and the Sands in Carnegie Hall, Who had made rooms of thousands feel intimate and personal? Now he was sitting on a box in a backstage corridor looking at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. Dean sat across from him, not beside him. Across, where Frank could see his face, where there was no hiding from the fact that the face was still there. Unmarked, present, looking back without accusation. An hour passed. Frank talked. Dean listened. That was the arrangement, and it needed no negotiation. Frank talked about pressure, about things building, about professional problems that had no clean solution, about personal things that hurt in ways he could not say clearly, about the weight of being Frank Sinatra, which sounds like a joke and was not a joke at all, about the way that weight accumulated, day by day, until it needed somewhere to go. The people who misunderstood Frank thought his rage was ego, that it came from a place of self-importance, from someone who believed the world owed him patience and deference. But the people who knew him understood something different. The rage came from caring too much, from holding too many things too tightly, from the specific pressure of being a person for whom everything mattered and who had no mechanism for when things went wrong. Dean understood that. He had always understood it. He had watched Frank carry this his whole career, watched him explode and apologize and carry guilt about the explosions and explode again. The cycle was not a character flaw. It was a person at the edge of their own capacity, over and over, always going further than he intended, always regretting it after. Dean listened without interrupting, without offering solutions, without redirecting. He just stayed present in the way he was uniquely capable of staying present, without judgment, without discomfort, without the need to fix anything. When Frank was done, Dean spoke. Not a speech, not a lesson, just the thing that was true. Friendship matters more than ego. Always has. Frank looked at him. There is a kind of gratitude that is too large for words and too private for display. The kind that lives in a look and stays there and is understood by both parties without ever being named. Frank gave Dean that look. Dean received it the way he received most things. Quietly, without making it bigger than it was. They left the building separately. But before Frank reached the door, he stopped, turned around, looked at Dean across the distance of the room. Dean raised his chin, just slightly, the smallest acknowledged. Frank nodded once, then he was gone. 10 people saw it. Every one of them. They saw Frank swing, they saw Dean catch. They saw Frank's fist in Dean's hand, and the forewords and the shaking, and the apology, and the hour backstage. They saw all of it. Not one of them spoke about it publicly. Not for years. Not for decades. This is the part worth sitting with. In an industry built on gossip, and in an era when stories moved fast, 10 witnesses kept one of the most dramatic moments of the Rat Pack years entirely private. Why? Because some things are too private. Some moments are too raw. You do not turn someone's worst moment into a story you tell at parties. You do not use another person's breaking point as entertainment. The crew understood something without being told. What they had seen was not a scandal. It was a human being at the edge of himself, and the other human being who stood there and held the edge steady. That deserves silence. There is also something worth noting about what the crew was silent about. Not about violence. Not about a fight between two famous people. They were silent about a moment of grace. About something rare. About the specific thing that Dean Martin did that nobody expected him to do, and that most people in his position would not have done. They protected it not because it was shameful, but because it was too good to survive being turned into a headline. Some things become smaller when they become public. This was one of them. The crew went home that night and said nothing. They went to their next job and said nothing. They grew older and retired, and some of them passed away, and the silence held. That is remarkable. In a city that runs on stories, in a decade that devoured celebrity, 10 people held one moment completely private because they understood that some moments belong only to the people inside them. In the 1980s, one crew member mentioned it, briefly, in an interview that was mostly about something else. He did not give names at first. He did not give details. He said only that he had once watched a man stop a punch with his bare hand and then save a friendship with 4 words. The interviewer pressed for more. The crew member shook his head. "Some things," he said, "you carry and you do not put down." The names came out eventually. They always do. But the details stayed protected. The account was brief. The man had been there and had seen it, and that was the extent of what he would say. Not because it was shameful, because it was sacred. Something changed after that day. The friendship between Frank and Dean got deeper, stronger, more honest in a way that is hard to explain, but easy to feel when you watch them together in footage from the years that followed. Something had been tested and had held. And things that have been tested and held carry a different weight than things that have never been tested at all. Frank never forgot what Dean did. Not the catch. That part was physical. That part was reflexes. What Frank remembered was the calm, the grace after, the way Dean had held his fist and not turned it into a defeat, the way he had said 4 words that were not a lecture and not a threat and not a judgment, just a redirect. Just not like this. Frank mentioned it privately over the years. Not often, not loudly. To people he trusted in moments when trust was being discussed. He called it his turning point. The moment he understood what real strength looked like. Not the strength that imposed itself on a room. The strength that held a room steady when everything in it wanted to fall apart. There is a specific kind of respect that is different from admiration. Admiration you can feel for a stranger. Respect of this kind requires intimacy, requires having seen someone at the worst and having watched them be their best anyway. Frank had admired Dean for years before that day. After that day, he respected him in a way that admiration cannot reach. Dean never spoke about it. Not in any interview, not in any profile, not in the carefully managed public statements that publicists helped shape. It did not appear in anything attributed to him. It stayed exactly where Dean intended it to stay, between 2 people. Private, protected, the way the real things always stayed with Dean. Not because he was secretive, because he understood that some stories are not yours to tell even when you are in them. This is not a story about a punch. It is a story about what happens when someone refuses to meet rage with rage, when calm defeats anger without humiliation, when a friend protects another friend from their worst moment. Dean did not win the argument. He did not assert dominance. He did not demonstrate superiority. He did the harder thing. He stayed. Think about your own worst moments. The times something built too long and came out wrong. The times you did or almost did something that your better self would not have done. Now think about who was there. The people who responded with matching rage, those relationships, did not survive the way they should have. The people who stayed calm, who held the line without abandoning you, those are the people you still think about. Those are the ones who shaped you. There is a version of strength that everyone understands. The kind that wins fights. The kind that dominates rooms. The kind that makes other people back down. Frank had that kind in abundance. It had served him and harmed him in equal measure over his entire career. He knew how to use it. He also knew the cost of using it wrong. What Dean demonstrated was a different kind, the kind that does not have a name in most conversations. The strength to receive aggression without returning it, the strength to stay in a moment that every instinct says to leave. The strength to hold your own face steady when someone who loves you is at their worst. That kind of strength does not get celebrated the same way. It does not look impressive from the outside. It looks like stillness. It looks like nothing happened. But something happened, the most important thing. Dean could have blocked the punch. His reflexes were fast enough, and everyone there would have understood. He could have punched back. Frank had swung first. The moral math would have been simple. He could have walked away. Let the moment be what it was and let the friendship figure itself out from a distance. He did none of those things. He caught the fist. He held it steady. He looked his friend in the eyes. He said, "Not like this." 4 words that contained everything. Not like this. Not here. Not between us. Not in anger. Not in a way we cannot come back from. 4 words that were a refusal and an invitation at the same time. Refusing the version of the moment that would have broken something permanent. Inviting a different version. A harder one. The one where they stayed and worked through it. That is real strength. Not the kind that wins confrontations. The kind that prevents them from becoming what they might become. The bravest thing you can do is stay calm when someone you love is losing control. Most people cannot do it. The instinct is too strong. The self-protection is too wired in. When a fist comes toward your face, the body does not consult your values. It reacts. But Dean's body and his values were the same thing by that point in his life. Decades of watching rooms. Decades of knowing when to move and when to be still. His reflex was not aggression. His reflex was clarity. And that reflex saved 2 things that afternoon. A friendship. And Frank Sinatra from a version of himself he could never have forgiven. Think about what Frank would have carried if Dean had not caught that fist. If his knuckles had connected. If Dean had gone down or stumbled back. If the punch had landed and the room had witnessed it, and the story had spread the way stories spread in that industry. Frank would have lived with that, not the gossip, not the headlines. The private knowledge of what he had done to the one person who had never asked him to be anything other than what he was. Dean understood that. Maybe better than Frank understood it himself in those seconds. Dean caught the fist not just for his own face. He caught it for Frank, to spare his friend from a moment that would have followed him for the rest of his life. That is the layer underneath the catch that never gets discussed. The protection was not self-protection. It was the other kind, the rarer kind, 1964. Frank Sinatra threw a punch at Dean Martin. Dean caught it, 6 inches from his face. Looked Frank in the eyes. Said, "Not like this, Frank." Saved a friendship. Saved Frank from regret. Did it with calm, with grace, with 4 words. If you want more stories about Dean Martin, the moments that showed who he really was, the quiet strength that changed lives, subscribe now. The playlist is waiting. These are the stories that matter. Frank Sinatra's fist was 6 inches from Dean Martin's face. Moving fast, 10 people watching. Nobody could stop it. Dean caught it. Mid-air held it steady. 4 words, "Not like this, Frank." The friendship survived, stronger than before. Because Dean Martin understood something most people never learn. The hardest person to protect is someone from themselves. The bravest thing you can do is stay calm when someone you love is losing control. Dean did that. One afternoon in 1964, on a movie set in Hollywood, with 10 witnesses who never forgot what they saw. A punch that never landed, a friendship that never broke, and a moment of grace that defined what real strength actually means.